I love growing companies and helping companies grow, taking them from under 100 people to over that 500 mark, sort of building teams and helping build the brand of the company externally for people. A lot of companies underestimate finding talent. Also, a lot of companies are paying a lot when they could bring a lot of that in-house and make it a much more cost-effective setup. That is probably one of the biggest mistakes you can make. Some people aren't the best interviewers, but that doesn't mean they're not good at the job. Founders or companies, they hire sales talent that comes across very well to them because they're salespeople, so they should do, but that doesn't mean they can sell your specific product.
We are live on the Objective Hiring Show. Today, we're joined by Aaron. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us.
No problem, Tim. Thanks for inviting me.
It's absolutely our pleasure to have you on the show. And where I always love to start is just to hear a little bit more about the guest, because then it helps our audience understand who they're listening to today.
Yeah. I suppose I've got quite an interest in recruitment, sort of history, sort of talent acquisition. Started working for a recruitment company. Wasn't necessarily sure that was the sort of path, but I really enjoyed it, really excelled. Worked for one agency, then went to another agency, and then moved into the I suppose talent acquisition in-house world when one of my clients did the I suppose the subtle but quite common approach. We'd love to hire an in-house recruiter. Do you know anyone that's exactly like you? Had that conversation, moved forwards from there, was really positive. Worked at that first company for 7 years, which was an engineering consultancy. A lot of projects setting up sort of all around the world. They were a Swedish company, so I spent a lot of time in Scandinavia, which was really sort of fun experience. Moved then to the world of FinTech for a scale-up company in the city. Built lots of offices, really helped them grow. It was just before they got invested in by private equity. So they basically were setting up to sell to private equity. Took them then through that really big growth period after they sold to private equity, and did that sort of 5 years. Things started to slow down when they were about to sell, and I suppose the role got a little bit not necessarily stagnant, but it was not the exciting sort of growth period. So I was speaking to one of my friends. And I was saying, look, and he basically said, "Oh, what is it you're looking for? What is it you like to do?" And I said, I love growing companies and helping companies grow, taking them from, say, under 100 people to sort of like over that 500 mark, sort of building teams and helping sort of build the, I suppose the brand of the company sort of externally for people and internally. He said, he worked for a growth equity firm, and said, "Oh, why don't you try and do something along those lines?" So I did, and now instead of I suppose just growing one company, I'm helping all of the companies in our portfolio grow to that next level. So it's quite an exciting sort of role I get. I do have to learn a lot about all the different companies that we have in our portfolio, but it's quite an exciting and fun challenge, and taking not just one company through that journey, but I'm sort of working with their sort of talent acquisition teams, their HR teams, their sort of senior management team, and taking them through that journey and helping to give advice where I can. But sometimes it's just about having the companies sort of being a sounding board for people. I also set up like round tables between some of the portfolio companies. So, for example, on Friday, we're having a conversation about how do you onboard remote people differently to how you onboard people in offices, because and how can we improve that onboarding process to make sure the tenure of those remote employees is as strong as it would be if they were in an office. So it's about, I suppose, being a sounding board, having those conversations and offering advice, and it's really exciting because we've got lots of really fun sort of, I suppose, SaaS companies, growing technical teams and really sort of whether it's geo expansion or just general sort of expansion, a lot of exciting times. So I suppose I've gone through that journey, and it's now sort of trying to share my sort of, well, hopefully wisdom with other people, and sort of a few examples along the way.
That's a superb summary and introduction. So thanks for sharing that. And yeah, when we chatted previously, your job just sounds fun to me, like getting to work with all these different companies. Maybe also very challenging, quite a lot of context switching. You have to learn a lot about different industries and people as well.
Yes, definitely. And also, I suppose the other thing is, and this happened very much at my previous company as well. You're going from a founder-led company to taking them to be an executive-led company. So I suppose a leadership team, whereas it used to be maybe one or two senior leaders, and a lot of the roles and the initial support I help with is building up that leadership team and bringing that talent in to play. And sometimes that's a bit tricky because it's a lot about the cultural fit. It's a lot about how their relationships are with the people, rather than just having the experience to have been there, done that. And also, quite frequently, it's about finding the right people who are ready to step up in their careers. So it's challenging, but also really exciting. And I get to give people a lot of opportunities for their first CRO role, their first CFO role. So helping them sort of take that exciting next step in their career as well.
And how intricately do you get involved with the portfolio companies hiring? Is it anywhere from just kind of advisory stuff to actually in the weeds of executing the recruitment?
Yes, it all depends on the position, the strategy. So it can be from as small as they just join us for certain specific round tables, just speaking to them via a sounding board, to a company where maybe they don't have any talent acquisition team or even minimal sort of HR, and I'll literally get into the weeds and get involved in the hiring process. Sometimes it's, okay, here's some agencies I recommend. Sometimes it's like, okay, let's support you. I spoke with one of our portfolio companies yesterday, and they're at that stage where they want to have a 24/7 on their support team. So normally I wouldn't get involved in those support level roles, but it's about looking at what's the strategy, what locations can we put these people in, and it's a very highly technical support team as well. So it's about finding where are the best locations to find that really strong talent, and how do we set it up, because it's not, you just need one person in every location, because you need, if people are sick, you need multiple people in certain locations, and how can we cover those time zones? So there's having those conversations for the strategy, and then there's some of them, we need a CFO. Can you help us find a CFO? And I get involved in that. So as you said, like I love that challenge. I love the excitement of sort of growing those companies and helping them grow to that next level. So I see everything that I do as like all the positive things of of recruitment and sort of talent acquisition. So I would say, yeah, I'm in a nice place.
Do companies almost sometimes underestimate recruitment then as really being a key growth lever for them?
Definitely. I think sometimes they don't understand, I suppose, how much goes into it. Sometimes what they're doing, and this is actually, so a really obvious example is my previous company. When I joined them, they had no talent acquisition at all. And we were about 120 people. And I think the year before I joined, they'd hired 30 people. Every single position went through agency. Not that there is like, you obviously go for agency, but where you need to, but the cost was ridiculous, and they were just accepting any rates, to be honest. There was some companies where they were paying 30%, senior positions where it was like 40%, and some even where they paid a retainer, didn't get the money back because they never got a candidate through them, and it was just crazy. Every single position from graduate to C-suite was all through agency, all cost a lot of money. I suppose I came in and we hired more than double the amount of people the year before, and we only had to go to agency once for those positions because they were pretty, like, I don't want to say run of the mill, but they're like, you can find these people. They're not sort of it's not too difficult a place to find that talent. So I suppose underestimating it that way. Recently, a friend reached out actually who worked at my previous company. He's just set up his own company. So they've got a startup. They're hiring, say, 10 people. So it's at very early stages, first in hires. He said, I need some help because he goes, the amount of CVs that I just get sent to me for advertising only on LinkedIn, I don't know what to do with it because, and he said, like, he goes, now I understand how sort of difficult your job is, because in the old days, I would just have a chat with you, we'd have it and we'd run it. And then we get the right hire. He goes, now I'm just getting, say, 500 CVs for every job I advertise. And it takes me all day to just look through the CVs. And then I've got to set up interviews with some of them. And, in the end, it was very, I suppose, serendipitous, but someone messaged me that day saying, I'm looking for a recruitment job. Do you know anyone that is looking for someone? And I basically put them in touch. I said, look, it's not permanent, but they had good experience in that space. Put them in touch, and they started for them the next week, and it seems to all be going very well. So it's, it's I think a lot of companies underestimate finding talent. Also, a lot of companies are paying a lot when they could bring a lot of that sort of in-house and make it a much more cost-effective setup. And also, there's some people in the companies that are saying, like, okay, you look after recruiting, that could be doing, I suppose, much more valuable things with their time than recruiting when they've got no experience of doing that. Because that's it's very time consuming, and if you I suppose if you haven't got some experience of doing it and the best ways to do it, it's a very difficult task. And I will say, a lot of companies, when they just do it internally, all they'll do is look at ad responses, and ad responses aren't necessarily the best way to find good talent. Sometimes they are, but not always.
Yeah, if I think back to the last company I worked at, which was reasonable sized business, turned over a few $100 million a year, no talent or HR at all. I never personally used a recruiter, but certainly the tech team definitely relied, obviously, on recruiters. I, for whatever reason, chose to do it all myself. So I was in the pain and misery that your friend was in a few weeks ago, putting up those job ads and getting inundated with those applications. And yeah, I probably had no idea what I was doing because I'd never done hiring before. So God knows how inefficient I must have been. So in fact, I remember having to pretty much stop my job for about a month as leading a data function to suddenly do recruitment. And so some ways, maybe not the best use of my time. Ultimately, the people we hired were good. So like the end outcome was at least positive, but yeah, maybe my time could have been better spent elsewhere.
Yeah, but obviously you might have adapted to it better than someone. So the most frustrating side is if you spend all that time, waste all that time, and you don't make the sort of right hires. So I suppose you were lucky, at least in getting those correct hires. But I've had people that try and will settle because they need someone in the seat as quickly as possible, and that is probably one of the biggest mistakes you can make.
Yes. Yes, you never want to be under duress, either looking for a job or trying to hire a candidate, because that inevitably does not lead to fun times for anyone. And yeah, you never want to settle to. I feel like if I were to think back holistically to running Aluba for 6 years, I reckon one of my critical kind of hiring mistakes would have been, the way I viewed it was, I would hire any candidate who ticked the boxes and passed the tests and objectively was good enough, as opposed to hiring the person I thought, oh, they're great, I need to hire them, if you see what I mean. It's like my benchmark was, I had no reason to not hire them. And I feel like that maybe wasn't the best philosophy.
Yeah, but yeah, it's sometimes, and I also think, I mean, obviously you've got experience and you're great making people feel comfortable. I feel that especially with graduates, and I think they're much better now. Universities set them up to be much more, I suppose, adept to interviewing. But some people aren't the best interviewers, but that doesn't mean they're not good at the job. So there's so much about making someone feel comfortable in the interview process as well, to really find out about their character and what they're like, and make them, I suppose, help them be able to answer the questions more effectively, just because they're not, I suppose, anxious and stressed about the interview, and they're actually just thinking about, okay, this is the question, and comfortable in your presence.
Yes. And how do you do that? How have you managed over the years to help the candidates feel more relaxed and chilled out?
So I've always gone on, I'm sort of penning it now, but both professional and personal. So I think that there's a fine line, but I like to remain professional throughout, but at the same time have a bit of a personal interaction. Try and find something that you share in common, and even if you don't, just like find out what's interesting to them. Have that sort of 5 minute conversation before you start an interview, and just try and get people to relax. And sometimes you can even say, don't be too stressed. You can just relax and be yourself. And the best you're going to do at an interview is when you're yourself. Obviously, there are exceptions, but mostly that is the case. But it's also interesting for interviews. I've had some candidates that maybe relaxed too much, and I remember once we had. And I won't go too much into it, but we had a candidate who literally was about to be offered the job. The only thing he needed to do was meet the the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer, who was just going to come and say, like, 10 minutes, because he liked to meet sort of everyone that was going to join. And in between the hiring manager going out the door and the CTO that's coming in, I was just sort of keeping him warm, having a conversation. And he said something that was incredibly inappropriate. And then, and as I'm sure you know, and we might get to later, like, technical staff is sometimes quite difficult to hire, and this was a very hard to find role. The hiring manager was super excited, like, we've got our candidate, everything was perfect. And then I had to go and have the conversation with him and the CTO sort of after they were like, oh yeah, we're ready to go. And I said, in between you leaving the room and the CTO coming in, this is what was said. And I would say that it's too big a red flag to ignore. And they agreed, actually, which made life easier, because the worst thing would be then to go to sort of my manager and have that conversation as well. Although I think my manager would have backed me being sort of chief people officer. But yeah, these things happen, and it's probably good that they happen in the interview process before, rather than 2-3 months into their employment.
Yeah, that is missing from the goal line for that candidate, I guess.
Yeah, it was an interesting one, and I think they thought they had the job already, which is probably why they let their guard down a little bit.
Yeah. I can almost empathize. I'm thinking back to a job I went for myself. Oh, this is a long time ago now, like, I don't know, 13 or 14 years ago. I can still remember the company name. I'm not going to mention them, but I'd interviewed with a partner, and he'd called me after the interview, said, yeah, look, basically we want to hire you, but just come back again later this week, chat to my business partner, my MD. And so I did trip up to Sydney. It's like a 4-hour round trip from where I was living. I had a max 10-minute conversation with this MD. And I tell you, he was a Tottenham Hotspur supporter. I can remember that. I almost definitely made some jibe about Tottenham because, they're Tottenham. And all we spoke about was football. I remember he had an injury, and we, spoke about our various football injuries and Tottenham. I don't know. Maybe I said something ridiculous in those 10 minutes, but I did not get that job. I still don't know why. It might have been something I said, or it might have been they pulled the role, or 100 other reasons. But always like to get a bit of feedback after the role, even if you don't get it.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. But it is like sometimes people do just say the wrong thing. But it's unfortunate when it happens, especially if it's a really hard to find talent.
Yeah, and it's something about the interview process that is just so stressful for so many candidates or for anyone really. Um, I was interviewing someone the other day, and they'd mentioned the upside in some sense that I hadn't thought about of remote interviews, because people do them at home in an environment they're familiar with, maybe their bedroom, maybe their home office. That is surely less intimidating, less anxiety inducing than going into an office where they described it, a typical interview room, especially in a corporate, as almost being slightly clinical. You got those kind of glass windows where people can see, and some kind of generic artwork. They said it almost felt like going to the waiting room at the doctor's, which for most people is probably not a barrel full of laughs. Um, yeah, is there something to be said then for like promoting remote interviews sometimes, just from the candidate relaxation perspective?
Potentially, I think maybe I always think the first interview is probably better remote, and then you can build a rapport with them, especially if it's the hiring manager, and then the hiring manager is also involved in that sort of final one. So you've got that initial rapport. It's just meeting in person. I do still, if you can meet in person, it depends if the candidate's going to be remote, hybrid, or in the office as well. I think. Um, I mean, COVID's changed the world that we live in today, sort of regarding interviews, because so much is done remotely. Realistically, we're talking 6, 7 years ago, and previous, every interview would pretty much be in person. So I think there's a mixture. You can use it sort of separately. I think for maybe tech people, remote interviews are okay, especially because more and more tech people want to work remotely. But it's and I also like the tech interview. There's lots of tools that you can use where you can actually see how someone codes and sort of working as a team and working remotely, because actually you're seeing how it would be to work with that person remotely rather than them just being on site. Um, Probably sales roles and positions like that, you need to definitely see them at one point face to face before you make that hire. So for me, it sort of depends on the role, depends on the candidate. I personally probably like, if I was interviewing, I prefer to have that face to face interaction rather than over um, sort of remote, because you sometimes worry about how's my internet connection? How's this going to happen? So you can sort of stress about different things. But I think either way, as long as the interviewer is good, mostly it doesn't overly matter. But I think for positions where you will be face to face in your role, it's probably important to still have that face to face part in the role, in the interview process.
Is there, because this is a 2D representation of ourselves we're using now with almost real-time connection, like it's pretty amazing, but still it's not quite the same as if I was in a room with you right now shaking your hand. This, like, I feel like there's still something that's slightly lost, although I can't put my finger on it. Is there, like, yeah, is there some information we might lack if we've done a remote, if you take away the potential for cheating and those kinds of things, just like the pure human interaction, is there something that is lost?
I think so, because another thing that came from COVID that's really beneficial is people are actually on time for interviews. So that is great. But with the in person, you do sometimes for the remote, but you have the 5 minutes at the beginning of the interview and the 5 minutes at the end, saying hello, saying goodbye. You're interacting with a few more people as well, even if it's like just the person that opens the door and you've had a conversation with them. But they'll have like, this is my interaction with them if I've said anything sort of that I shouldn't have done. The 5 minutes leaving, you see like their sort of I suppose presence. So it's really beneficial just to be able to see that and have that sort of rapport is much easier to build in person than remote. I found like after COVID, it was pretty crazy because the amount of people I'd spoken to quite frequently, and then I met them in person, and no one knew that I was 6'7" sitting in a chair. So to let you know, I'm 6'7", but you can't tell that when you speak to someone on the screen. So that was, and that's an instant sort of conversation starter that you don't get from having sort of on that remote call or anything like. Did you want a drink? And then you know sort of how someone likes their coffee and little things like that. And speaking sort of whilst you're making the coffee and having that sort of conversation as well is all beneficial. And you don't get that sort of on a remote one. This is the start, this is the end, especially if people are like really sort of on time and on target with their meetings and conversations.
You're in a really interesting position, I think, in the sense that you get to see across all these different portfolio companies and how they do hiring. Are there any common issues you've seen, any common trends with how they do hiring, common problems, or is it just each company so different that you can't map it out?
There's always common trends, and I suppose there's common ways around it as well. So a common trend: tech talent is hard to find, but it's about how you go about that. So some companies will look at, okay, how do we hire more remote staff? Is that the way forward? Some, which I think is better, is and this is, and I suppose this isn't necessarily a common trend, but it's quite a frequent base where a lot of people hire to tick boxes. This person meets everything that I'm looking for. But the candidates, especially if it's a hard to find skill set, they don't don't sell the company back to the candidate. So then when you get to the offer stage, the candidate might not accept. And they're like, oh, but that's the candidate I wanted. And you really have to sort of push back and work with the hiring team. And it happens in sort of tech positions, I would say more than most. You really have to push back. The other one that is quite common is a lot of founders or companies, they hire sales talent that comes across very well to them because they're salespeople, so they should do, but that doesn't mean they can sell your specific product. So don't just hire someone because you're like, oh, this person's really good, they come across really well and they've given me amazing numbers from their previous company. I need to hire that talent. You need to, I suppose, have examples of them selling your product. So whether it's a case study or something on those lines, it makes it a lot easier. The other thing with sales talent is, and really common for, I suppose, scaling or startup sort of companies, is they look and say, okay, to hire the best sales talent, I need to get someone from the largest companies. If it's FinTech, Bloomberg, if it's sort of ServiceNow, if it's like MedTech, sort of you're hiring from the largest MedTech companies. And actually, those people in their current roles walk into the room and say, "Hi, I'm from Bloomberg, and what can I take your order, please?" Whereas if you're for a challenger company, you need to actually actively sell, and it's a very different sale for a company on the up compared to a company that's already in that position. So I think a lot of people look and say, okay, who's the biggest in our industry, our target market? Hire sales staff from them because they'll be really good. And obviously every now and then that'll work, but at the same time, it's a very different sale. So I would always look at sort of like, if you're going to do that, make sure that they have a case study and show you how they're going to sell your product. But I would probably look at people that have worked for challenger companies that have gone from, say, the 5-10 million ARR to the sort of 50-100 million ARR, or obviously more. But further than that, you start getting people that aren't sort of don't have that mindset, and it's a much easier sale when you're working for an established company.
What about processes? Like, are the portfolio companies at a level of maturity where the processes are already kind of really solid, or do you also see some struggles there?
See some struggles. A lot of the time, the hiring manager, and the easiest way to hire someone is if the hiring manager knows exactly what they want. I still think that is sometimes rare. Sometimes people are told like you need people, and that's great, but they need to understand what do they need and why do they need them. They can't just replicate someone in their team, because then you need a more varied team. It's yeah, there needs to be a plan and process. I've found lots of people just have multiple interviews for the sake of having multiple interviews. And then all the interviews, they don't actually tell the interviewer, this is what I want you to interview because of. They just let them interview them. And then what happens for the candidate is they got 5 interviews that are all identical. The hiring manager and all the interviewers all give the exact same information. And the candidate has a poor experience because they're just replicating it. You could cut that down to maybe 2 or 3 interviews. You say, okay, you're going to be looking after sort of all the technical questions. You're going to be looking after all the sort of project management questions. Choose the specific people, give them this is what I need. This is why I need it. And make sure that you trust that person to be involved in that interview process. Makes it a much better candidate experience because there's not so many interviews. But also you find the sort of correct talent in a much quicker way. And also make sure that when you're choosing the interviewers, you let them know, like, this is what I want you to sell about the sort of company. Obviously, never lie, but like I always used to sit down with my sort of R&D team, and I'll say, like, why do you like working for this company? And we would sometimes sit down in like a room, have a bit of a workshop. What is it the most exciting for you to come to work? And then when you're speaking with candidates, you can share this information because it's likely that some of this information will be exciting for them as well. And the reason we did it in sort of like a room was because some people would mention things that someone else had never thought about, or it's something that's not exciting to them. So then I would give them like a little bit of a cheat sheet. So every time they had an interview, I'd be like, remember, these are selling tools to sell the company as well. So hopefully that's answered your question, because I know I went off on a little bit of a tangent there as well.
No, that's awesome. And I hadn't heard of that aspect before, the cheat sheet of selling points to the company. That's really awesome. And I guess the interviewer, if they're savvy enough, would know which one to put forward based on what they know about the candidate that they've learnt over the past hour or so.
Yeah, you'd like to think so. And it would sometimes be like, if the candidate mentions that they like to use new technologies, then mention the fact that we have a group. So one of the companies, we have so they have 2 hours every week where they work on a project using new technology, and then they can take that to the company and say, like, obviously a project using new technology that can benefit the company. So whether it's working with some AI technology or React or something along those lines, and it's like, okay, how can we implement that into the organization? And then that happens frequently, so they get a chance to work with new technology and then push their ideas forwards. And every month they would say, okay, we're going to work on this project from the feedback of what's been happening. So it's I suppose it's an exciting opportunity for people that like to use new technologies. And there's lots of different examples in different areas that you can give, but if you don't mention it, no one knows.
Yes, and that's, from the candidate's perspective, also such a more believable explanation as well, rather than just saying, oh yeah, you get to use technologies. That's like a concrete, specific example that they can kind of take to the bank. Yeah, that's awesome. And I think part of the trick with setting up these hiring processes, I guess, is making sure that they're kind of done consistently. You mentioned not having this kind of 5 different interviewers all looking for their own thing, but making sure that everyone's kind of singing from the same hymn sheet and you've defined it ahead of time.
Yeah, it's all defined. Everyone knows what is your part in the interview, what you're asking them questions about, and what you're looking to I suppose, feedback. And I suppose it's to try and make the hiring manager not scared, because I feel sometimes hiring managers, the reason they do lots of interviews is because if 10 people have interviewed someone, then and the candidate doesn't work out, then they can say, well, everyone interviewed them, so it's not I'm not the one to blame. Not that it should be a blame game, but I think it's about, like, why are you having these people interview and what feedback do you actually get? So it's about the value of the interview, having that process so they know what's going to be happening in the interview, being able to sell the company as part of the interview process. But as well as that, like, these are the specific skill sets we need. You are the expert in this. This is why you're asking questions about this, and then being able to feedback. So everyone knows at the end of the day, you have that conversation, the process works. Sometimes you'll get hiring managers that will always say, and this is, I'm sure a lot of recruiters will find this, you get feedback and saying, oh, actually, I realize what we're looking for is slightly different because of one of the candidates that I met with. So they don't really know what they're hiring at the beginning, but they'd like to interview a few candidates to then think, okay, what I actually need is this. And that's not ideal in the process. The other thing is, okay, you've got one perfect candidate. I'm holding off on offering because I want to make sure that we got 2 or 3 perfect candidates before we make an offer to one. And then it's like, but surely you know, because of the other people in your team, what a perfect candidate looks like. If you want that candidate, you need to move quickly because they've got other opportunities as well. And it's about, I suppose, educating the hiring manager that they should know what a perfect candidate looks like. And if they've met a perfect candidate and everyone in the interview says that that's a perfect candidate, you don't have to go back to stage one just to have more candidates. It's nice if you can, and often you will have, say, 2 or 3 candidates to choose between, but you shouldn't, I suppose, rely on the fact I need 3 perfect candidates before I can make an offer to one of them.
Do you find that the more experienced hiring managers are better at hiring in the sense they kind of understand these trade-offs, that they know what they want? Is it like an immaturity, inexperience thing, or is it just a skill that's underdeveloped?
It's a skill that's underdeveloped. I've had some people that are just, one of my previous CFOs was the best person to work for ever because he knew exactly what he wanted. He would give, these are the examples of candidates that I've in this space that I've hired previously. He said they're too experienced now, but someone that was like them, say 4 years ago, knew exactly what they wanted, and the hiring process would be super quick and an easy process. And then you have other people that are really experienced and they just think, oh, I'll just meet as many candidates until I find the right person, but it's wasting a lot of time. So I think it's a underdeveloped skill. Some people have it because they work at it. Some people don't. And I think it's really, it's as someone in talent acquisition, it's for me to push back to the hiring manager and say, okay, what is it you're looking for? What is it you're trying to get out of this? And making sure that they're the, I suppose, the real end of line sort of decision maker, because sometimes at the end of the day, they've got the perfect hire, and then they say, oh, I want my manager to be involved in that process as well. And he decides or she decides it's a completely different candidate that they're looking for, and they disagree. And then it all starts again. So making sure that the hiring manager is the decision maker, and we don't need that conversation with their manager or someone else before starting that hiring process, because that is another frustrating one, which I'm sure a lot of people in talent acquisition sort of internally have been involved in.
Yeah, the old moving the goalposts problem midway, changing the terms of the search, or some Johnny come lately coming in and saying, nah, actually, this is what we need. It's now my decision. Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's not normally in the middle of the process. It's at the end of the process, but the process then has to start again, so it becomes the new middle.
Yes. Yes, it is so frustrating. And yeah, I sometimes think people are gluttons for punishment or something. Like, who wants to interview like 30 people to hire one person? Let's hire the person, get them doing great work. That's what we need. Like, the goal is not doing the hiring. The goal is to get the person to do the stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, definitely.
Aaron, if you could ask our next guest any question about hiring, what would you choose to ask them?
So I suppose something that I get quite a lot and I try and help people with is, candidates are asking me quite frequently, like, "Oh, have I got any roles going, or how can I stand out?" So I think it's quite an interesting one. How do the candidates, how do they stand out in the process? What makes a candidate stand out to you? And how can they put themselves, I suppose, to the top of the list?
Interesting. That's a great question that I'll ask our next guest. If you were going for a job now yourself, anything come to mind and how you'd put yourself to the top of the list?
So I do something. There's a few things. I do one thing that every sort of head of talent acquisition absolutely hates, but actually it really works. I'd reach out to the hiring manager. Obviously, for me, that's okay because it's talent acquisition. But if I was in a technical role or a marketing role, I'd reach out to the person that's actually, I think, hiring that on LinkedIn, and sort of send them a message why I'm interested, and really sort of focus on that. When I'm submitting my CV, I think a lot of people will use AI to help them with their sort of resume writing. But I also think, like, what I would do is put the job spec into AI and ask AI to say, can you identify what are the most important things that I should mention in my resume if I'm applying for this job? So that gives you a bit of an example. You can help sort of improve that. Obviously, you only mention the things that you have the skill set of, but then you can actually say, okay, these are the most important things. I haven't really mentioned my Scrum sort of methodology experience, whereas actually I should be mentioning that. So I would use AI as sort of support. I'm not saying you need to write a cover letter for every position you apply to, and I don't think cover letters necessarily work actually anymore. I think it's better to reach out to people and obviously have what you need on your resume. But I would say you need to use the sort of technology that is there available to you and use that sort of AI to get sort of yourself ahead. I did some volunteering where I spoke to students at school, and they were talking about sort of when they're applying for jobs. So they're at that age where they're starting to apply for jobs. And I said, get used to AI, but also every job you apply for, search on AI, because you don't have to do loads of research on a company. You can get AI to do that research for you. Give me in bullet point view, what is the company that I'm applying for doing? What's interesting about them? What have they done in the last sort of 6 months? What are their sort of pain points, and really get a bit of an understanding. So AI does the hard work for you, but then when you go to that interview, you're knowledgeable about the company, and that's just going to make you sort of stand out in the interview process. So I think that there's a few things that you need to stand out. Networking is so important. Use LinkedIn everywhere that you can, and just reach out to people and just say, if there's a company you want to work for, reach out to them and say, I'm really interested in working for your company. I don't know if you've got any positions coming up, but I'd love you to keep me on file. And a lot of the time, because I know it happened to me, the hiring manager will go to the talent acquisition person. Oh, this person looks really good. Could you set up an interview for the process? Even if they've applied and they're sort of stuck in with 500 resumes, they're going to get pulled out by the talent acquisition person, because you can't say no when the hiring manager comes and says, this person looks good for the role. Could you set them in the interview process?
Yes, some great suggestions and tips there. The networking piece is so important, and one of those things that I guess is, well, I guess you've almost got like the short run transactional stuff that's like, yeah, here's an open role. Here's who I think is the hiring manager. I'm going to reach out to them with some kind of crafted message, versus maybe the kind of longer play where you meet people over years, build a rapport with them, become trusted with them, and then, you know, at the right time, they can potentially unlock a door for you.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely the case. If there's a company that is your goal to work for, or a position that's where you want to be, look for those people. And a lot of them, I mean, probably a bit of an ego thing, but if you say, like, I'd love to speak to you about what it's like to be in this position, how you got there, and sort of understand that, a lot of people will give you that time of day. And whether it's a job straight away, or it could be, as you said, like 2-3 years, you keep in contact with that person. and regularly update them. This is what I'm doing, and I've got in this after you recommended it. So make sure it's personalized to them, and then have that sort of ongoing conversation. It'll just get you ahead and moving forwards.
Some great recommendations, Aaron. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us on the show today. It's just been such an easy, engaging conversation. And you've just got such great expertise that you conveyed so well to our audience. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Tim. And hopefully you never know. And obviously the worst thing for anyone is watching yourself again and listening to yourself. So I'll have to get someone else to confirm that is correct.
Well, here's a tip then if you're dealing with the cringe is I've asked sometimes ChatGPT to review me based on the transcript. And it came back with some pretty good tips. So that's one option.
Okay. No, that's very good. Thank you for that.